Hello, lords and ladies of the internet. I'm the King of Candor, and welcome back to episode 20 of the Council of Candor. Writing politics is today's topic. And I've had a couple people, unfortunately, who I was hoping to be here, can't be here, but that's all right. We're going to power on as we can. I got an excellent panel for you all tonight. Tonight, we're going to be talking about how do you actually write politics in your fantasy settings, or for any setting, really. There's a good way and a bad way. I'm going to tell you that right now off the bat.
There's a lot of bad ways.
There's a lot of bad ways. If you want all the bad ways, look at modern writing. That's pretty much the worst thing it does. Is it puts the politics before the story. But we'll get on to that in a second. As we do, why don't I go around the horn and introduce the co-hosts real quick to everybody? Why don't we start in? Let's go. Let's keep the audience on their toes. Let's go in reverse order today. Pops, why don't you go first?
Oh,
I'd love to. So, yeah, we straight coolin' today, fellas. You already know what it is. Not to suck my own dick, but I actually was the one who suggested this topic. I think this is going to be super interesting. I thought of it in light of recent events, and if you don't know what I'm referencing when I say that, you're living under a fucking rock. So, we're feeling good today. I'll be honest with you, when it comes to politics, in my own personal experience, I'd say I used to be more invested in politics, but I feel like most of my fellow Americans these days, I mostly follow them just for the entertainment value and the occasional opportunity to say, like, I told you so when something bad happens.
Sports.
But I would say, yeah, absolutely. This is a topic that when it comes to storytelling, world building, creating a setting, it absolutely needs to be not only acknowledged, but also, discussed and kind of thought of in depth. I do want to clarify, first of all, what we're doing here is we're not talking about how to shoehorn in your own personal real life politics into your setting. We're talking about why it's important to establish a coherent political system within your world that you're creating. So I would say what's interesting about it a lot of the time, and this is something I thought of as I was like doing some research, taking some notes, is I feel like when people hear like quote unquote politics, when someone's talking about a story, a show, whatever, they kind of narrow it down to two things. They think of like political intrigue, like Game of Thrones, and then war. Like those are the two things they narrow it down to. But the truth of the matter is, at least in my opinion, that pretty much every story worth telling, every setting worth experiencing, it's gonna have its own internal politics be relevant to at least to some degree. And, I've heard it said on Twitter a bunch of times, everything is political, or at least I think it can be interpreted that way. So this one's going to be interesting. I think we've got a few different perspectives around the panel here today. So hopefully we can all learn something. And obviously I'll try to contribute the best that I can. So somebody else talk and shut me up, please.
All right. So next up, we have Mr. Shadow or Magic Goat. Me and him are launching a YouTube channel soon. More on that as you join the server and poke around a bit. But how you doing today, Shadow?
oh, hey there. I'm doing great. I'm not here to be anyone's dad today, thankfully. And I'm excited to talk about this. I think that we kind of do a disservice by telling people how to talk about politics. People go like way too far into either like yes, politics. So it's about real life politics and how I can shoehorn them in and, push forward my message. Or they go in the opposite direction where like politics just don't exist and no one like disagrees on anything or like anything interacts realistically. It's kind of really important that like for a setting to be coherent and to make sense that like people in the setting have to have opinions on things. And just because the opinions they have in the setting aren't, what the author believes in doesn't mean that like it shouldn't still be included if it like makes the story interesting or makes the world make sense.
Uh-huh.
So I'm excited.
I think it's going to be a fun and important discussion to have. And I would like to introduce, last but not least, our final host for tonight, Mr. Dez. How are you doing today, Dez?
Doing good. Just
You're doing
came
well.
on here and ready to. Oh, okay, look at this guy. Already, I say like one sentence and I'm already getting
Yeah,
pissed.
one grammatically incorrect. We're talking about writing.
Exactly. Talk about
True.
writing.
Yeah, well,
Get it
I
right for
think
the writing.
if you're in the server, join the server. You know I can't write. I am famously illiterate, despite all the books I read. Okay.
Oh,
So-
hey, samesies.
For sure.
Just read anything I've ever typed in chat and you'll know.
Yeah, unfortunately, my
Okay,
local
let's not
authors
go
have
to-
bailed on me today. I'm stuck with the typo squad.
Yeah, I know. The
Shoot.
people who actually can.
The B team, bro. Des,
Hey,
you got
to be fair,
Very much.
Hellions not here, so
Des, you got anything
you don't
else?
got the trifecta.
I wanted to touch on one thing that Shadow mentioned. So unless you got something else to say, I'll jump right in.
For an opening, no, I got nothing really.
Yeah. So basically, the idea of it's almost like ridiculous to try and like I said before, we're not here to talk about shoehorning in your own personal politics, and honestly, you shouldn't do that. Like establishing a world where there's multiple different factions and everything will make the story more interesting. I feel like having, let's say, a character who subscribes to whatever you believe in, have them be portrayed as morally perfect, undefeatable, and everything, it makes the story boring. It creates a Mary Sue. We've seen it 1,000 times already. For example, I think one of the best, we're probably going to talk about Game of Thrones a lot when it comes to this. But I feel like one of the things that gives them an advantage, or gives Game of Thrones an advantage, is the fact that despite the fact that I keep saying the fact, despite the fact that you look at certain characters and you say, well, they're morally wrong, or I don't agree with what they're doing. The truth is they get a fair shake. They still are like portrayed, and like we understand where they're coming from, their perspectives, their motivation, and everything. So that's what makes the story interesting, and that's what makes us kind of invested still in what happens with those characters, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. It's not just evil for evil's sake. Besides Ramsay Bolton, maybe, but um, yeah, I
But
feel
those
like
types of
that's
people
that's
also
it's something.
exist. They're all about personal power and personal, like growth. That is also a political statement to specifically eschew politics. And I do want to mention, as we're getting into this, politics are important for your story. Again, not because we want to shoehorn in and correct people's beliefs, but because it gives you access to a vast amount of different characters and world building opportunities. This really opens up some interesting stories and can help enhance your stories in a way that is often lacking. And I'm going to point to something that's somewhat political, but it should help get the point across with religion, actually. The worst part about religion in almost every fantasy setting is how lame and sterile it is. There's none of the harsh violence that you see
Mhm.
in reality between the two religions and even good aligned religions. And I don't, putting aside whatever your personal feelings are, if we assume that you have two good aligned religions that don't worship the same God, they should still kill each other. There needs to be a reason for them to not like each other. There needs to be something stopping them from just, one religion wiping out the other, especially if you've got a healing god and a crusader god. Why would the crusader god let anybody who worships the healing god go? Because that's just less power for him. By default, the crusader god should be more like, hey, you have to worship me because it's going, it's going to increase my power. And all politics is power plays. It's the same thing. So when you have these things like kingdoms and wars between them, it doesn't make sense if you don't have politics backing it up. Like Pops was saying, one of the reasons Game of Thrones flowed so well before they ruined it was because the characters are active in their own ways, either personally or politically. And if they chose to not act politically, that in itself is also a political choice that those characters made in the show. It helps really enhance and pull everything out. You gotta remember that when you're world
Yep,
building.
it's something.
To jump off that a bit, it kind of it should kind of be like almost Greek mythology in that way, where like the city states would occasionally vie, be like, okay, which god do we want to be our patron? And I guess specifically I mainly am thinking about what is it? I think this Athens it is. Yeah, exactly.
Athena.
Where yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so you're gonna find out if you start
Where
reading Greek mythology, Athena is like maybe a secondary goddess, and she isn't really relevant until Athens shows up. As Athens shows up and gains prominence, suddenly Athena starts getting a lot more fanciful stories about her. It's interesting how that happens, because it's related to politics. And going back to another political thing to remember is you can have characters who disagree politically work together, and it allows both of them to really highlight the politics of your setting. I find it endlessly
Yeah.
boring whenever I look at a fantasy setting and I see, okay, these guys are basically communists. These are basically liberals. These are basically just Republicans. Oh, it's so lame whenever you see that. You're in a fantasy world.
Not
You should have completely crazy like ideas for politics.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say also it's almost detrimental to like the ability to make the story better to have it be centered on your own beliefs because you should be creating characters who, for example, like even if they disagree with you, you still need to kind of establish them as like having a valid enough perspective at least that people are going to be invested in them. So it becomes boring if you just in your own thing.
Mhm.
I hoped he was here so I could point to him, but unfortunately he's not, so he's going to get shout out anyway. If you read Pag's book, which is linked below, I believe,
Oh yeah.
there is because it's set in the far future, humanity can basically, like a human, if you're rich enough and powerful enough, you can sort of live forever. You can keep having your
Mhm.
body go through refreshes, so your mind never dies. With that,
It's
being
not even that expensive.
no,
Yeah, they've got he has what like a physical clone that you can put your consciousness in.
yes. And not even that, you can just have like nanites just fix all your DNA and stuff. But so knowing that, logically, you can start exploring some more outdated political ideologies. One of the big problems with something like a monarchy or like any sort of government with a single head is he can't possibly manage a vast empire, and when he dies, his heir is not competent. But what if you didn't have
Mm.
that problem? What if you could have Julius Caesar, who could manage the whole empire and he could live forever? What do you do then? Would people naturally want a monarchy? And he lightly explores that a little bit in his setting. And like that is already a much more interesting exploration. It's way cooler than when you ever see in other fantasy settings, science fiction settings too, that just have a king. And it's like, why do you have a king? What is the reason for the king existing here? There's like it's terrible because we look at like what the hell's going on here. This doesn't make sense. I love Star Wars to death, but the fact that the Emperor is the Emperor kind of doesn't make sense. I understand that he took over as for the Republic,
Yeah.
but people really shouldn't be like worshiping him as the Emperor as they do in the setting. It gets really weird how advanced the Empire gets in only 20 odd years. But Star Wars is small failings
Yeah.
aside. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, just basically that I agree. Like Star Wars, because that is such a vast world when you take into account the fact that like it's, across an entire universe. Like why would a certain planet of people even care about the Empire at all if they're like so far removed from it? It's almost like it's only weird if you think a little too deeply into it because it is a great story. But
Well, the problem with Star
yeah,
Wars is
when you
they
think
were a
about it on that,
thriving democracy like 20 years earlier.
uh,
They weren't a thriving democracy. Like
We're not
they
showing
had a
that
lot of issues, which I agree that in the
stable. I would say stable.
I don't know if I actually agree because I mean the Trade Federation, a federation, not even a planet, is able to get seats on in the Senate. They're able to block a motion to like they were able to delay the stuff with Naboo. Like that shows a very big political failing. Like that the Trade Federation has that
you
much
see
pull that
enough.
they're
Like
able to
the
delay them.
people aren't suffering enough, is what I'm saying. It shows that there's problems at the top, but you don't have enough people agitating. Because remember, all political systems exist for like
I agree.
the legitimacy comes with people. It does not matter like what the
Mhm.
logic at the top is, whether it's a divine monarch or an electoral college. However you get there, the people still need to believe in the system, or else they're going to find ways to overthrow and rebel it. This is another problem you get with all evil
I do
empires.
agree with that.
Well, and it's funny. The Empire in Star Wars, ironically, even though it's the poster child for terrible evil empires, is exempt from this for one reason. But every other evil empire you see, especially in poorly written stories, they're evil and they're imperial for no reason. They don't have it. I don't know why people would ever willingly work with the Empire. Whereas Star Wars
Why would they
explicitly says,
even
"Hey,
war? Huh?
look, the core worlds are having a great time. It's just a little bit of political
Yeah.
repression, but we're all safe now. We don't have any more evil aliens attacking us from the Clone Wars. We don't have any droids attacking us. And in fact, if you get into the comics for Star Wars, it's said that the Empire is constantly pumping up propaganda that they're still fighting the CIS and all that, even though the droids have been deactivated for like 10 years at some points, which is fantastic
Well,
because that
not
tells you why the Empire would still be gaining legitimacy.
Not only
I
that, they also have stuff where like they have this big campaign in one of the comics, which is really interesting and cool to show. Where not only like they didn't only kill the Jedi, like Darth Vader lets a Jedi live so he can specifically be humiliated in front of the people so that they lose faith. You know, they do all like anything that's related to Jedi, they
Power play.
scrub up, they clean up. If you have like a name related to a Jedi, you have to like change it.
Yep.
They build like basically a school center so that oh, you're some poor desolate world. Well, here's an Ivy League college, and if you do good enough in this Ivy League college, you can go to you can go to the military, and then all your financial troubles will be fine. So it shows a really good in some of the comics way of uh pushing of like how the Empire was able to gain so much loyalty among the humans, especially
And I
because
Yeah,
think,
that's what
smaller
they
level.
focus
before we continue, I got a shout out Not Alfarius. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. He says a thing to consider is that even any faction is likely going to have sub factions. A political party
Okay.
might be sort of a coalition of people who only agree on some ideas, and an ideology will have both moderate and extremists. Exactly. That's another fantastic point to get to. I believe we're going to dive into
Right.
that a little bit later, but since you brought it up now, I think that it's also highly underrated whenever you talk about politics and fantasy. Everybody's either a diehard believer or they are diehard against it. You never have
Yeah.
any nuance in between.
I
It's
was
fascinating.
one of the things I feel like we run into the same issue with like evil for evil's sake, or like, they're just evil because they just are. I feel like you run into that a lot in fantasy. So that's number one, is like, the evil king is just evil and he's there and he's evil. Like, so that's the one thing I had. And then to talk to Dez on what he was saying, I feel like something I broke it down to like what's important to try and establish a world where politics makes sense, like the inherent political systems inside the world makes sense, is like the two things that you need to know is like basically you need to know your history, you need to know about politics just in general, and also like psychology in general needs to be acknowledged, because what Des was saying, like the way that you can humiliate someone, the way that you can propagandize someone is very important, and you do need to at least acknowledge it, take it into account, and just what am I trying to say? Like you need to understand the way that the characters are going to think and the way that the people will see these actions. Like Des said, it's more powerful to humiliate someone sometimes than it is to just wipe them out. Like leaving someone alive, but leaving them, for lack of a better word, like cucked. That's going to be a bigger statement than just saying, "Oh, I killed him. He's not relevant anymore." It's a bigger thing
Yeah,
to put him on a lower status than you. You know what I mean? So that's one.
Mhm.
yeah. I definitely will say that an issue with Star Wars is the fact that there's only a 20-year difference or gap
Yeah.
between episode 3 and 4, so that like
It happens
it
really
like
rapidly. In a
before the
galaxy that has no
prequels, before
change.
the prequels, it was like that. Yeah, in the prequels, like before the prequels came out, they like were toying around with like much longer, which makes sense because even with 20 years, even with all they show like in the comics, and it's not really long enough to be perfectly honest. It's like what, one generation, like it's not really enough to. But what are you gonna do when after episode 3 comes out? They didn't really have much of a choice, unfortunately.
It's funny because they almost make up for their shortcomings in that realm by just having such a great story, regardless of the timeline.
And it tasted fine when I did that.
I agree. I do think yeah, I
But
agree. It's
No.
I mean like the movies go touch on politics a bit, and I think the politics in there, for as brief as they're touched on, is interesting and I like it a lot. But
mhm,
I mean, with the comics and books, it goes into a lot more detail especially with like the political maneuvering. One of the most famous examples comes from one of my favorite examples, I should say, comes from Star Wars Republic. I don't remember what issue, but one of them is like Count Dooku basically takes over a planet, and the government's like, "Hey, I'll be a symbol of continuity with the old government," and Count Dooku's like, asks like the dark Jedi that's working with him. He's like, "Should I do this?" And one of them's like, "Yeah, you should do this. It's perfectly makes sense. It'd be continuity. We'd look like a stable government." And then the main character of the comic, Quinlan Voss, is like, "That's retarded. This guy's a tyrant. He's hated by his people. If you kill him, you'll be looked like as a liberator, someone who's going to make change that's better. And Count Dooku is
Uh,
like exactly right.
Again, you have to acknowledge how like that's like the psychology within that, the way that propaganda can affect people.
And before we go on, I want to quickly say hi to chat and give Shadow a chance to talk. I see Federico's in chat. I see your stuff. I do agree that
No, that's my guy.
writing, he's great, and I think that writing value based on politics is related to morality. Yes and no. You can believe in something politically, even though you think it's slightly immoral. A great example is actually, and I'm not trying to get into like modern day politics, and we're not, we don't have a super big discussion here, but it's kind of helpful for touchstones for people. Christian libertarianism is a difficult concept to square away because libertarianism wants absolute freedom, which means you can do everything, including sin, as long as it's legal. And Christianity obviously has a morality basis that has much more like restricted guidelines. How you square those away, which are two different moral codes, to get the idea of a Christian libertarian and like what that means to this specific person is important. The other big problem that I see whenever we talk about politics and fantasy and writing is unless you're Heinlein for some reason, whenever you're exploring politics, it's almost always from a denigration view or like a hyping view. You never have somebody just have an honest discussion in their settings. It is really annoys the heck out of me because characters can have such like good and different like takes if you really write it well. Again, I'm talking broadly. There are specific stories that do this very well. As we talked about with Star Wars a second ago, when you start doing it really well, it does enhance the story. It makes characters more interesting. And I saw you try to say something a few times, your Shadow, and I want to give you a shot to jump in because I think you're getting cut off by the excitement in the room.
Yeah, let them cook.
I mean, I was just gonna say that I think something really interesting that we get from fantasy and writing is we get really unique opportunities to take these ideas of like different systems that either don't work in the structure, like structures that we currently have or haven't been tried out, or can only evolve from like very particular events. And they really let us explore very, very unique ideas when it comes to these sorts of politics.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of like especially with when talking about like sub factions, people have very different ideas about how things run, how things work. And when you have a world that is like fundamentally different from our own, you have a lot more like creative freedom to explore that. And it's a great way to like enhance any story. It could be the entire point of your story, or it could just be something that like adds this sort of like unique flavor and aesthetic and culture to it. Like you look at Tolkien, right?
Uh-huh.
People like love elves. They love dwarves. A lot of like things that were popular from there, people took and they use it when they make their own elves and dwarves. They don't take everything, but they usually take at least like some part of it.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes because with talking like Lord of the Rings, obviously it is like very clear cut good versus evil. Like you can tell who's good and who's bad, who's morally wrong, who you want to root for, and everything. And like the issue I think that people run into is that everyone with fantasy stories and world building and establishing a fantasy setting, you run into this issue where you base your things off of Tolkien, but he had created a narrative that was so good that sometimes like little hitches and divots and things that like you might look at as an issue if the story wasn't so good would be a problem. And I feel like I feel like you can only have such a great narrative that it makes up for the politics, and most people just like he told such a good story that almost like the good versus evil simplistically it was, what am I trying to say? Like it was like a simple thing on a basic level, but the story was so good that it almost like canceled it out. I feel like most people
It's
fall
done
into
so well that
a trap.
you don't understand how hard it is to do. I think is what you're trying to get to.
Exactly.
He did it so masterfully, and I do want to point out, as now Altharius brings up, if you look at the like Pop's saying the legitimacy and the why behind kingship and like how you get there, and then Altharius talks about how in Game of Thrones, Robert Baratheon used the fact that his like ancient ancestor was probably a bastard Targaryen to help his claim for the throne. This goes to building legitimacy. That's what Tolkien does really well when he writes his kings and such. They have built-in legitimacy. Why is Aragorn the king? Because he's the son of here. It goes all the way back to here, and he goes back to here, and it's just all the way back, to the past. And it's like, this guy was the king, and he was the son of this king, and wow. Okay, he's got a pedigree. That's important, because the bloodlines and what you can do is quite important. Also, Aragorn, goes out and fights the battles. You notice how in Lord of the Rings, which is so funny to me, that people think it's all about blood when it's not. He has the right blood, A, but B, he goes out and does the hard stuff. He goes out on trials for 70 years before we see him in the movies, I believe. In the books. This dude's living a whole last life. Then he gets to show up. Then he helps defeat the ultimate evil, and then they make him king. I mean, who else would you want as your king? He clearly is a problem solver, a go-getter, and he's got a good head on his shoulders. And that's what, you have to always look at whenever you look at these fantasy stories is, like I said earlier, why do people follow your king? Why would I ever listen to you? Why would I listen to Aragorn?
Yeah.
He fought, the battles. Look what he did for me. Doesn't matter if his tax policy is a little bit wonky. I don't need to know his tax policy, George. You still haven't given me any character in Westeros' tax policy, by the way, you fat fuck.
To jump, I really want to jump off of that for 1 second. That was so majorly important, especially with kings and emperors, especially in the Holy Roman Empire. It was so big. Not only did they always try to connect to they always tried to connect to the previous bloodline. The Luxembourgs, the Habsburgs married into Luxembourgs, the Luxembourgs married into the each one of them was in some way connected to Charlemagne. And not only that, the Habsburgs also were not only that, they're also, by the way, we're also Trojans, so we're the best ever. The Romans did it too with Trojans. They were also we're actually Trojans from Troy because Troy was awesome. Not only that, but with the Holy Roman Emperors as well, they, a big thing was, are you moral? But also, are you fighting your own battles? Are you a 6'6" buff dude? If you're that, we want you to be emperor because that's awesome. You look awesome. You're impressive. You're gonna kill people.
German, he's cool.
Exactly. He's dude, if you're the emperor, you're gonna need to be able to bench press me, basically. It was a big thing that you had this big imposing presence.
Let me jump on that real quick, because I feel like the trap that people fall into a lot of the times with the fantasy settings that people are creating these days is that they narrow it down to the idea of well, if you're the son of the king, then you deserve to do this, and then everything's just going to be hunky-dory, which is that should not be the case. It's way too simple, and it's a trap that people fall into that almost makes the story not not make sense, but the idea of somebody just being well, I'm the son of the king, and then everyone just supports them. It's ridiculous. It's why would we? We need to know a little bit more.
I actually disagree. I think it is bad at that point, because unless they're being controlled by some powerful, by some advisor that has enough influence to basically be okay, we don't have to worry about this idiot. His advisor who's doing great is controlling it, so we don't care. Unless something like that's happening, absolutely rival claimants would come up. Whether it be brothers or nephews. I mean, especially with Charlemagne. I think Charlemagne was fine actually, but his son had to deal with usurpers. All the Carolingians after Charlemagne, as far as I'm aware, had to deal with usurpers. Charlemagne's line was a usurper. They overthrew the Merovingians. They had the last Merovingian king tonsured because they were completely feckless, and the Charlemagne's line comes from they were the prime minister, basically. They were a advisory position that they made hereditary, but they weren't kings before. They made themselves kings.
Wow.
Quickly look at the chat real quick. Alex Gomez, today's discussion, and it's all right that you're late, my friend. We're talking about politics and writing and how you can do it well. The basic idea is how you can use politics to enhance your story. Not your own personal politics, but actually exploring politics and such. And then, as Nodal Ferrier says, He agrees with us that the founding myths for kingdoms, families, and cultures are also a super cool thing that is very underappreciated. I really agree. And I actually think that, there's specific things that really make me mad that we're not talked about more. Pep in the Short.
Pep in the Short. That's
yeah.
correct. That is correct. That it was Pep in the Short who did it. Yeah.
But it really
I
makes me
couldn't
mad.
recall that was Pep.
Yeah, but I want to talk about like heraldic animals for a second because this ties into it. I absolutely hate how heraldic animals just show up in a lot of fantasy. They go, "Oh, we have a bear. Why? It's the bear." You live in a freaking fantasy land, dude. You shouldn't just have bears and wolves everywhere. We have dragons and unicorns on the official animals of Wales and Scotland, and they're next to England. They have lions. Lions don't live in England. That's a mythical animal to the English, but the lion is everywhere. You could totally
They did,
do these
though.
cool mythical things. Go ahead,
They
Bob.
did, though, back in the day.
Yeah,
Lions used to be cave lions. If you want to look them up, they didn't have manes. They were totally different than the modern day ones. But
I don't think
yeah,
they got up to
go
England,
on.
did they?
Oh, briefly, yeah, way back in the day, though. But it might be more of a remnant because like lions used to be spread through at least through like France and Southern Europe.
I know they're in France.
There was.
I was gonna say I think it's mainly France because the only reason England has it, from my understanding, is because of the Normans.
Yeah,
it might be a remnant, of like the Roman Empire and their own symbolism.
it's that, and it's also Christianity brings it over because when you have Christians, they talk about the lions being in the dens and stuff like that. That's because the Middle East is much closer to where lions are in Africa, so they wrote about it a lot more. Plus, the Romans loved lions, so that continuity. So yeah, to answer your question, Alex, isn't all fiction biased in some capacity? Yes, it is. However,
of course,
you really, really should try your best to, if you're going to include your bias, make the story good. If you're going to write a good story, naturally your bias will be knocked away a little bit. It has to be.
That's another trap that people fall into is the idea of like, so let's say you've got your own political perspective and you want to put that in a story. Okay, so go ahead and do it. But the issue is that people write these stories with their own perspective and they just, without any reasoning, without any establishment, they say this is right and the other people are wrong. And they put their political opposition as these like, ass backward, violent extremists, whatever you want to call it. When in reality, if you want to have a good story where people are invested, you should do something to prove it. You should prove that your perspective is good. And I feel like people are just a little lazy, and it's more like you're just playing off of whatever the climate is in the modern day, and you're just banking on the fact that people are going to follow you based on whatever the political climate is in modern day, rather than actually proving it and saying like, okay, well, let's have a discussion, let's have an argument, let's have a fight, let's have them actually understand where the other people are coming from, and then prove that they're wrong, rather than just saying that they're wrong.
Great example. Walk through the young adult section in any bookstore, and you're going to see a lot of buzzwords on those books. You will see a shocking amount of buzzwords on those books. Like, is this a story or is this like a manifesto? I'm not really sure anymore.
Yeah, it's. Go ahead.
Well, no, you. And I do want to kind of hit a little bit of a curveball to everybody real quick. Something to remember about your story. Not all stories need politics. You got to remember that when you're writing your story. We're talking about if your story needs politics in it and if your story is going to be enhanced by it. Again, Game of Thrones is the perfect example. You need to know the politics of what's going on there because the entire story is about interfactional fighting. However, if the entire story of Game of Thrones was just Arya and it only started the moment she left Westeros, then we don't need politics. Who gives a rat's about what the politics are going on in Westeros? Because she left. All you need to know for the politics of Arya is her family was killed. And after her family was killed, it really, really doesn't matter what goes on anymore in Westeros. Again, assuming we're talking about this hypothetical here. So when you're writing a story, make sure you know that. Make sure you note it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I touched on. Real quick, I do want to just say, yo, what's good, Nebula? And also,
hello, Nebula. Welcome
one
to
of
the
the
show.
One of the things I wanted to say, because I did bring it up when I first introduced the topic, a couple minutes ago, was that like politics, it plays a role. It doesn't have to be like the story doesn't have to be centered around politics. The world doesn't have to be totally centered around it. If you want to have a narrative centered around it, you can. But what's important is just the fact that like politics can be, let's say, it can be totally in depth to the point where like every decision you make is based on political maneuvering and everything. But also politics can still be relevant, but not be the biggest thing if you have more of an isolated, contained narrative like you would with Arya, where maybe your decision making is based on, well, I just don't want to break the law. That's still technically political, but you need to just be aware of it. But it doesn't have to play a huge role, but it depends on the type of story that you're writing.
I think that it's there's an example I use whenever I talk to people. I've had multiple, probably dozens of people come to me about stories before. I'm not going to point anybody out, but I usually give the example when I say, hey, when you're writing a story, if it's about a group of adventurers who are going north to slay a dragon that's beyond the kingdom's borders before it gets to them, you don't need to know what the court wizard thinks. You don't need to know what's going on in the realm. If you want to attach that because you're going to do that in book 2, that's fine. But don't worry about writing the intricate storylines of what's going on in the court, like politics and the other kingdoms, if the whole story is them going north. A fantastic example, look at Lord of the Rings again. The only political offices that we know about Lord of the Rings are 3. We know about Gondor, we know about the steward of Gondor, what's going on over there. That's very important to the story. We know about Rohan and what's going on with Rohan and the king. Why are they important? Because we need to know who's in charge here, and we need to know how we can get the people who are in charge on our side so they can help us with the Free Peoples. We only know one more political office in all of Lord of the Rings, and that's the Mayor of the Shire, because that's when Sam goes there and has so much hobbit sex. He has more kids than Jesus had apostles. By the way, remember that next time George R. R. Martin complains that there's no, romance or anything in Lord of the Rings, Sam absolutely fucks.
I mean, a good example of that kind of like do it when you need it is Dungeon Meshi. Occasionally they'll talk about the politics, but like 90% of that show is like, oh, we're in this dungeon. Oh, we have to fight some monster. How can we make this food? How can we make this a delicious meal? How can we make the viewer hungry for like a meat that physically does not exist and they will never be able to eat?
Skillfully.
You can have politics, like you can have just a general political system that the characters operate under as like this like looming backdrop that hangs over their heads, but it doesn't have to play a major role in the story. It totally depends on what story you're writing. But like the idea of like having some sort of system in place is what you need to like. That's why I use the word acknowledge. Like you just need to have it.
Again, only if the story talks about it. Because the point I was going to go with is we got no idea what the relationship that Bree has to the rest of the world. Who runs the city of Bree? Oh, good know. Are they a kingdom? Are they a city state? Are they just a bunch of merchants? Do they have a mercantile empire? Don't know. Don't care. It does not matter because Bree, the part that Bree plays in the story, has nothing to do with the politics. But Tolkien, because he's a world builder, he does have that somewhere. And you as a writer don't need to do that yet. Don't waste your time with that when you're first writing your story. However, if we then went back to Bree in a later story or in a side story, and we said, hey, Frodo and Sam maybe want to set up a bed and breakfast here because they want, for like one of their kids to run or something, then you got to get into the politics of, well, the mayor of Bree doesn't want to run it. Just like the mayor of Lake Town is only important when you're in The Hobbit because he's got to be a rival to Bard. Suddenly the mayor is important. Until you meet him, he's not important and nobody cares about him. That's how it should be in your story. Don't waste your time writing all these intense political things if they're never going to come up. It's really annoying whenever I talk to people and they spend time writing these like political intricate things, which by the way, the reason it's a waste of time is, I'm sorry, you're never going to be more politically intricate than the Byzantine Empire. Your politics, as a student of politics, are not that advanced. I never see anybody writing a system that is so unique and weird that I could see it. And I really, I'm going to pull us another side tangent. I want to talk about better political systems that you can use. Because it really bothers me how lame they all are. I mentioned earlier the immortal god kings that are in Pag's story that by default in the setting. You can have that there. Yeah. You also can have an oligarchic council and like corporations running everything, which is Sure, but like, what if the CEO is immortal? Now you get some interesting stuff. One of the most interesting fantasy ideas I ever had was, hey, what if there's a kingdom that had it so after you died, your body was entombed in like this special tomb that basically let you hang around after death. But because you were dead, you lost the legitimacy to rule the kingdom. But you could still talk in the afterlife. So what would happen is the new king could come in there and talk to the last 100, or 1,000 kings in a row, whatever many were in this kingdom, and ask them for advice. And he got different advice from people. What a fantastic idea! That fully fits with the setting where you have necromancy and you can resurrect people and your spirits have to stay on. He has a council of all the previous kings. And what if they have a system where, hey, there's only 5 kings here to not overwhelm the guy, and after the next king gets in, well, then one of the other people can finally pass on. Their duty to the kingdom is fully fulfilled. They no longer have to act as a political advisor. What an awesome and fascinating system. So if you assassinate the king, guess what, buckaroo? You're still stuck with his policies for at least 4 more kings. Because he's going to be advising the next guys how to do stuff. What an interesting system, just based on what if necromancy was in a setting.
Isn't that one of the things that one of the South American empires ran into with, I think it was like one of the native South American. Was it the Incas where basically the king like used to, like, even though they were dead, they still technically owned their own land, and that's why they kept expanding?
Yes, actually. Yeah. So to get the full details, and this is you correctly identified my inspiration, Pops. The Incan Empire is actually not an empire. What it actually was a collection of like land held by a bunch of trust funds. So imagine it like this. You are a local like chief. You get a bunch of your boys together. You conquer 2 or 3, areas. Let's say you conquer the whole state of Florida. Then when you die, your son gets to be elected to the new chief. He has to still be elected. They always elect the son, though. He doesn't get any of what you had, though. That's still your territory. So now it's given to the trust of people who run your territory for you. So now in perpetuity for the whole rest of your life, they're running your territory. What this does is it automatically seats bureaucrats to keep like fortifying their territory and enhancing it because they're going to be here forever. But what they do then is because you're the son of the guy whose land they own, they give you a loan, and now that you get enough money, maybe you go out and conquer Georgia, and you also have enough money now to conquer Alabama because you could borrow what your dad had, and you repay the loans back, and then when you die, your son can borrow a loan from you and your grandpa's estate and keep conquering territory. That's how the Incan Empire, as we call it, existed. It's really just a series of kingdoms that are stuck in perpetuity, giving each other loans, which is that's a fantasy thing right there. And it was a real life setting. I've never even heard that brought up before until I started studying the Inca. Like, why is this not in like another fantasy thing? Especially like think about orcs. Think about any of the warmongering races that you have in D&D. You could totally see them having an empire system like this.
I'm thinking.
Go ahead, Pops. Oh, I think Pops got out of us there.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the. Never mind. The lore of Pops and orcs is a comical, but honestly,
the orc lore.
It is so crazy that we have all these political systems and these random, like, whether it's religious beliefs or what have you, that people just I don't know if people just haven't heard of them or what. But
people haven't heard of them. I mean, like, even within monarchies, like ancient monarchies, there's a wide variety of like what they were actually doing. Because you look at like the Holy Roman Empire, it's completely different from the Eastern Roman Empire. It's completely different from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It's completely different from Rome itself. It's completely different from the Russian Empire or the German Empire. And like they all are getting their sources of legitimacy are different in many of the cases. Who can be the actual emperor or king is completely different in all of them. The way that you get to that position is wildly different. So,
and it's such a shame that, like, in fantasy settings, like, I feel like everyone just wants to have like a monarchy when it's like you could do a billion times more. There's so many other options. Like, please just know your history.
I was gonna say it's like a typical like English monarchy. It's like a regular hereditary monarchy, but like that's not the only type that existed, and especially not the only type that existed in something like the Holy Roman Empire, where like dukes and kings and counts were all competing, and if they gained enough territory and power to become the Holy Roman Emperor.
It's also
Um,
not how it even worked in Britain the entire time. Like, there's the whole hereditary thing, the oldest son gets it. It wasn't like that for a good
Yeah.
long while.
That came along a lot. That came out along later. I mean, the biggest thing with Charlemagne is that he dies, all his stuff goes to shoot, I can't think of his son, but it goes to his three sons, but two of them die, so it only goes to one in the end. So that succession wasn't too bad. It almost split apart, but then it does go to his son that lived, and then it does split apart from there into, actually it splits into four, I think, because then one of the sons died before the son of Charlemagne dies. So then there's like two grandsons and two great grandsons, if I recall correctly.
Very messy.
Yeah, with all that, and it's only later do they start being like, okay, look, I know you're the son. Please go into a monastery and never talk about being in the line of succession later. Like,
Again,
Uh-huh.
that's just going back
or
to
later on
interesting
for
real world things. You can have some really whacked out ideas. Like you could have a religious communist society in fantasy. That can't work in our reality because communists are explicitly an atheist organization. But you could totally say, "Hey, I'm gonna go take huh? What's that?
I think that was one of the.
Oh, I'm
I think
sorry.
that was
Give
a
me.
Pops. I think that was one of Pop's animals. I don't think that was a person.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, my
it was
bad.
a
I was.
peacock.
Oh, it
I was
was
doing a little
it
thing.
was a peacock.
I was like, that wasn't a human.
Sorry about that, chat. The peacock, he got a little rowdy there. But yeah, like why couldn't you have a Christian communist society? Even though that Christianity and communism are probably incompatible, you could totally go out and say, I'm going to make a religious one in your fantasy setting. Take your vaguely, Christian group and pick a vaguely communist group and try to put them together. There technically was a group that was like that in the 1600s in Germany. I forget what they were called, but yeah. And Galaxy Gomez makes another
What'd
great
you say,
point.
sir?
Huh?
What was your point with that before? I was reading chat, so I got a bit distracted. About the
Shut up.
thing
Dude.
that exists in Germany.
Sorry. So I was gonna say, there's a group
Yeah,
that
shut
was
up, stupid.
in
The point.
central, like I think it was like near Poland. They were basically Christian communists. You could look at them and how they ran stuff. It was terribly for a while, but like that's an
I
interesting
think you're
idea.
talking about the Dish Martian. You might be
Might
talking about
be.
the Dish Martians.
I'm not positive on them.
That's why, like, honestly, like, if Des just as like a historical person who reads a lot of books and is a fucking nerd about it himself, if he wanted to create a setting, he would be better off with all the knowledge that he has than most people that just say, "Oh, I love fantasy, I love Tolkien, or I love Game of Thrones or whatever." Because he's aware of so many other options that you have. If you want to do these things the right way and make them interesting or be original, it has so much value to just be aware of history. Like, it's ridiculous the way that
Free
people
real estate
seem
for
to be
storytelling.
kind of limited in
Yeah.
their knowledge. Yeah.
Because
Do you want to spin
it
the
kind
chat
of
real
feels
quick?
like a
Because
lot
the
of.
chat's got some great points. Give us a sec. Alex Gomez says, "When was
let
the
me
last
see.
time a fantasy setting even had a republic?" I swear, man, it pisses me off to no end. Republics. Here's a fun fact: during the medieval ages, there were more republics than there were monarchies. Monarchies did not start to get really into fashion until we get to the early modern era, because one of the things a monarchy requires is it requires a lot of substantial control over regions. You had a lot more clan structures and republics way back in the day, which is really interesting. You wouldn't know that if you didn't study history. And also, like, I really like what Alfari said, because he's like, oh, some PCs are pretty aggressive, and they mess up causes. Yeah, that's really cool. That's a really awesome idea you could do.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you look at people, America, for example. If somebody was just to say, "I'm in charge until I die," everyone would be like, "Nah, go fuck yourself." Like, of course, most people throughout history were not down with a monarchy until they got like to a level of like, we have this much power, we have this much firepower behind us, and everything.
The professional soldiers
Well,
were knights, and
couple of
that
things
really
I actually
helps.
do want to. Yeah, I actually want to point out a few things
Exactly.
from
Yeah.
Cat with Alex Gomez. It's really fascinating too, because like you could easily pull from something like the Venice monarchy. Jeez,
Venetian
going against
Republic.
my own point. The Venice Republic, which was a major Venetian republic that mainly starts getting a lot of its power and influence and infamy right before the First Crusade, since they were beginning off just kind of like a satellite state of the Eastern Roman Empire that eventually they lose all of Italy, so they have no control of it. But they get a lot of infamy because they helped defeat the Norman invasion of the Eastern Roman Empire. And then, of course, a lot of the republics of Italy were very important. Coming to mind, especially Florence, I believe, was very important, especially for their loans that they would give out. Genoa was well-to-do, from
Entirety of the
from
Medici family
memory.
and the way they ran stuff there. There is a situation in the city of Urbino, which is a part of Italy, where you get if you start looking at history, you get some of the craziest stuff there. And this little just town, and like in the 1500s, it was founded. It was under Federico da Montefeltro, I forget what, but yeah, Federico of Urbino. This dude was like a complete badass. He lost his right eye and his nose in fighting on a bridge single-handedly and in a tournament. I believe, he also was like the greatest military commander, and he raised the most powerful shock troops ever. So what he would do then is he then started saying, hey, we're going to be mercenaries for somebody. So they would start being mercenaries all around. And it's like, okay, now you got a mercenary group that goes everywhere. And because his hometown of Urbino was the small city-state that had no power, their armies couldn't stop anybody else. But his army was so great, what he did is he said, okay, I'll join you guys, but I'll join for a discount if you also protect Urbino. So he started getting these massive coalitions to start giving free land and free territory concessions to Urbino. And without ever having Urbino declare war, they became a moderate power in the middle of the region. Because this guy, as a mercenary, was playing politics with all the other power brokers around, and his mercenary army was good enough that they could swing the tide of a battle, but they couldn't defend the city themselves. What an awesome thing. He's a player character from any D&D game you're playing. Like him and this band of psychopaths are so great that they basically can run around and do jobs for the other kingdoms to make the other kingdoms not want to screw with his hometown. It's fascinating that you look at like, wow, this guy had an entire life like an RPG character, and you're looking at it like that's a shame that we don't get to pull this into fantasy because you're too worried about how politics work to have that interesting story beat in your fantasy games.
Well, also, would you call that something that's relevant to the idea of like, even though I don't agree with your politics or like I don't care about them, I'm still on your side for, whatever reason, whether it be financial or what? Like having that be a part of a part of your world, it's more realistic, it's believable, and it makes a story better, in my opinion. I feel like there's a lot of stories that could benefit from just having people like that, just being like, hey, listen, I'm doing what I do on a personal level for, whatever reason, financial, personal beliefs or what. But yeah.
Well, a very interesting point that Nalfarius brings up, which I love. I love that he's bringing up because I love the HRE. I do. It's very dear and near in my heart. I read a very long book that
HRE
went into
dumb.
very autistic detail. I hate you. Anyways, he brings up imperial cities, which the HRE is actually kind of a great example for all of this, because the HRE was very diverse and interesting because not only did they have imperial immediacy, where for a long time there was basically hereditary land for whoever the HRE emperor was. Now it wasn't hereditary because it went to the emperor basically, which depending on would usually go from one family to the next, but it didn't always. There's some exceptions and weird things, but not only that, but also because it was the emperor, everyone was under him. But the bishop, there was not only bishoprics, so like a bishop would control territory. There was some republics. Lubeck was one of the main merchant republics in the HRE, which was also part of the Hanseatic League, which was fairly important.
Or people, you're speaking
Okay,
of
and
setting. Let me
and
help you out here, Des. What Des is saying is,
Mhm.
if you look at what is considered a normal monarchy, which would be the HRE, even underneath the monarchy, you have other groups that have other political affiliations. So the way you can
of
Right.
think
course,
about it is, you have a republic, so they elect their own president or leader, and then that guy goes and talks to the head of the empire and says, "Hey, as a republic, we're underneath your empire." Think about how if you have the European Union today, all the different parts of Europe elect their own leaders, but they all convene in the European Union to kind of vote and work together. That's a political system you could totally have. Why don't you have a confederation of kingdoms? That would totally work, and that could be a fascinating thing. That's actually what a lot of the Mongol hordes and khans used to do way back in the
oh
day.
yeah. What they used to do, I believe, was they practiced some of the earliest primitive forms of well, I say primitive, but it's like, almost freedom of religion, right? Which is basically like, we're going to let the people do their thing as long as they pay tribute, they're good. Like, that's a decent way to set up a kingdom. That's a good way to establish like why something is stable within your setting, because
A lot of
you're allowed to do your own thing as long as you don't rebel. Like, there's 1,001 different dynamics that you can do to make the world make sense and make it interesting without
Well,
having it be, a stereotype of a
I also
monarchy or
love
whatever.
that you brought that up because you could add a very interesting part of world building into the story because a big part of the HR3E, of course, because it was a Catholic monarchy, originally, or you can get into the detail because technically it happened before the first schism. But besides the point, they
Okay.
were crowned. The emperors were crowned by the Pope until the Habsburgs stopped being crowned by the Pope. But they were always heavily connected to Catholicism, basically.
Okay.
The idea of the Pope and the power of the Pope. So what happens when good old Martin Luther shows up
I
and
don't think it's
creates
Martin Luther yet.
Protestantism?
I actually want to
Okay,
respond to
okay.
something Alferia said.
I was gonna,
He's very
I was
funny
gonna
with
go into
his.
religious wars.
I know,
Yes.
but I was going to say it's very funny because he's correct that Florence is the basic currency. You're basically pickpocketing a yearly salary. Yeah, it's completely true. Florians are like a high level currency. If you want a perspective,
Okay.
whenever you're playing Assassin's Creed, you're basically pickpocketing $10,000 bills. So it's like, yeah, you got 500 florins.
Yes.
So you just got, a
That's
quarter
what's
million
yeah.
dollars. It's so funny.
That might be a little deep, but I mean, if you want to go so deep within your world that you're establishing like an exchange rate with the currency, like, God bless you. Like, wow.
Yeah,
Like,
that's the
credit to
point.
you.
Yep.
In my setting, we
But
have a
yeah,
special. You know what? Since we're on currency, I'm going to lightly touch something in my setting. I absolutely hate exchange rates in
Look at this
currency,
guy.
and I really think that
right.
it is one of those things where it's hand waved away in all these other settings. So I didn't want to hand wave it, but I understand that players don't want to spend 45 hours converting between currencies. It's really fucking annoying when you have things that weigh like 20 pence and this pence, and oh my god. So what I did is I have prices normally, and everything costs a certain amount of what's called sovereigns or crowns. There are a bunch of gold coins, and not just gold, silver, brass, copper, and any duke, monarch, or king can mint them. But because all the merchants throughout the world have a standardized magical set of weights that they can immediately select, tell this is fake, this is what's going on here, you can't really counterfeit coins. And if you start like undercutting your coins, all the merchants will just stop trading with you. And they realize, hey, we need to let monarchs. Just one of the ways to get legitimacy is printing coins. So then you can print whatever coins you want, and whatever material you want, and you get to put into categories. So the $1 bill is a baron, the $5 or $10 bill is the count, $20 bill is a duke, the $50 bill is a king, and the $100 bill is an emperor. So when you go to the pub with some boys, you spend a couple dukes, and you're good to go. And one of the players in one of my other games, he would go up to a poker table and he'd say, "All right, time to count some counts." And you get these interesting little ways that you talk about things of you exchange sovereigns. And another thing is people call them crowns. So you have a pile of crowns in your pocket, and you get all this different cultural baggage, and you get to have all these coins throughout the kingdoms. And that's because I wanted to explore how politics and like affects monies and monetary rates. I wanted to have a way around that, so that's how I got into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, economics, that's another political thing. And like I've only ever read like a couple of books and like seen a few movies here and there where like people actually pay attention to the fact that like, hey, money here, this type of money has more value. Let's say the dollar has more value in Eastern Europe versus actually in the States and everything. Like it's if you're going that in depth, like you're the man. Like you're absolutely paying attention and you know your history and you know your facts and things like that.
But
So
I would also say
I feel
don't
like
do that unless your story needs it, though. My story
right.
required it.
Yeah, fair enough.
I require because my game is it's a tabletop game, so you need to be able to spend money. You need to go into an ancient tomb, and when you get $500 in the zombie, that $500 still needs to be valid. So to have that work, I needed to come up with a way and a reason that money never was devalued, never went up or down too much in value. It was very stable, and that's how I did it. And now Ferris explains the florins thing. He's like, if I remember, 1 to 2 florins was what a peasant made in a year. 10 was for the servants of the Medici, and the Medici founded a bank with 100,000 there. So think about that. You found an entire
They
bank
were
with $100,000. That's all you needed. That's how valuable florins used to be.
Des, you know more about this than me probably, but the Medici were one of the richest families in history, right? In the history of Europe.
I
Because
am
what I
not
believe
as
was
knowledgeable as I would like to be. I do
okay, I
actually
got
have
you.
a book on it, but I haven't read it. But my understanding is they were extremely rich because even without having read about them
Chat's
directly,
doing
I
something weird
have
right
read
now,
a
boys.
lot
Hang on a
of.
second.
Yeah. Briefly, I
Oh,
learned
by the
about them
way,
when I
Chat's being
your
really
thing,
fucking
like
your
weird. I know it's. I'm
I
trying
can
to
see
figure
but
it
you
out.
scrolling on Discord and stuff.
to
I
the
know. I'm
point
trying
that
to
like
figure it out.
it also establishes if I'm if I'm incorrect, anyone in the chat or you guys can
That was
jump
weird.
on and tell me that I'm dumb. But one of my favorite fun facts about the Medici was that wasn't one of them like even like trying to be the Pope and everything. Like they wanted political power and they were able to achieve it
I think one of them
through their
might
through the
have
wealth.
gotten
Yeah,
the
he became
Pope.
the Pope. You
One
fist
of
fight him
them
at the end of
might have
Assassin's
become the
Creed
Pope.
2.
Yeah, one of them, and like
That's a great
I think,
story. That's awesome.
yeah, yes, like you can do a lot with that, especially. I mean, the Medici were like very big. If I recall correctly, not only did they get the Pope, but they also one of their women became the Queen of France, basically based on the same thing. Where like they got their influence was so much because they were bankers that they were able to do a lot of stuff
Right.
like that.
Say
Where
money
they
talks.
And how many stories do you actually ever see that happen in though? Like
like especially with bankers and
Unless
stuff
it's
like
about how capitalism is bad, I never hear anyone
yes.
talk about it.
yeah, the
And even
funny
then,
thing
it's
is
usually
that
very poorly done.
yeah, I feel like people that talk about it only ever have one perspective. But like I feel like people can and should do better because it really is interesting and it really is like fascinating. And that's why I'm like you got to know your history if you want to write about things like this because the way that the economics and politics work and religious influences or what have you, like if you know more and more about that, like you're going to make a better story. Like that's how you can do this.
Two things that
Definitely.
chat's got to correct me on. First, Donald Ferris is right. It was Borgia, not a Medici. I'm wrong. But Blackaroonie, thank you so much. He says, I'm broke. This is all I could afford. Thanks, Bowden. Don't worry, buddy. You're going to be working for Bowden soon. You got a few months underneath him. You'll be able to take his money. So, yes, everybody go thank Mr. Rooney and go watch his channel. Give him. Let's see if we can get him to monetize before he comes back from his special place.
That's my guy, bro.
He's
That's
a
my
great
guy.
kid.
That's my son.
Yes. He's my
Shout out to him.
Yep.
All right.
He's my
Yeah.
son from another bun.
Your
On-
son from
yes.
another father. I understand.
Yeah. He spent his whole enlistment bonus on us.
Come
I
on,
feel
man.
honored. No, I feel honored,
Oh,
dude. The military doesn't pay shit. I'm real glad that he, found us worthy enough. And I thank him
Hey,
for that.
you know what? Did he join the military for political and economic reasons? Like what's Rooney, you got he's got a story. Like, come on, dude.
Yeah. And notice how none of the things we talked about when we talk about politics today really said you need to talk, address these certain issues. You don't. You don't need to address different issues in your storytelling. You really could just have a
Yeah,
really
this
fun
just
exploration of just completely made up crap. You don't need to go on a grandstand and tell me about your actual political beliefs. I mean, look at Heinlein. He constantly does that. We make fun of him for it. He's the guy who wrote Starship Troopers, which people can't tell if it's serious or a parody with the movie and such, by the way, which is fascinating. So you look at that and it's like, well, it's kind of interesting, the political bent there, but like, how much more interesting is it not knowing what you were supposed to believe? You get to have a full exploration of all sides of the issue, which really makes it, more fun. You get to have interesting characters.
Yeah, it depends on the scale of kind of what your characters are doing and the consequences of it. Like politics can be relevant to some degree, but if you have it very limited, you can still have it be relevant, to a small degree. But sorry.
And it's okay if just you have the politics of the setting in your mind, and you just hint at things if you really like world building.
Like,
Like,
there's no shame in like having a story be like, limited to what a couple of characters do and why they do it, and politics can only be so relevant. But it's always something that should be kind of looming in the background, some central authority that you have to kind of pay homage to.
If you're going to touch those stories, if you're going to go off and like, if
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, don't cram it into your story. That's another important
yeah.
detail I want to get into. But don't, if
Yeah.
you're going to talk about politics, for the love of God, don't have another hereditary monarchy where you have one evil son who usurps it from the other one, and then the good son is with it, into it without any deeper discussion of the ideas behind it. It's so incredibly lame to me whenever I see people copying story stereotypes without any full exploration. I mean, we could probably spend, and we probably will spend the last part of this podcast just brainstorming randomly generated political ideas that are like completely new things that you could do. I just like fantasy settings and for fictional settings. Like, hey, you could do this in this world because you have this kind of magic and stuff. Like, you could have so much interesting and like diverse political systems running your kingdoms and empires. It blows my mind that nobody does, and I just don't
here's an
get it.
Yeah, that's the funny.
idea.
Oh, go ahead,
Here's an
Shadow.
interesting idea as a randomly generated idea. If healing is a thing in your setting, like there's healing magic, usually the church does it. And one day someone finds out a way for people not affiliated to the church to do it. Now you have an entire story about how like that clashes. Is there big fights over it? Is it a monetary thing? Is it a religious thing? Is it like difficult to learn? Is it easy? Has the church been hiding something? Did the church just legitimately not know and now they're shocked? You could write a story like that in a million different ways. You could take very
Yep.
basic political ideas and just one little thing can completely shake it up in fascinating ways. You see it in real life all the time where someone just comes in and changes the political landscape.
And like they're not trying to be a
Absolutely.
radical all sometimes. Sometimes they're just trying to ask questions and push a little bit, and it completely upends everything. And it's really like
Yeah.
wild to watch.
You don't have to be a radical to radicalize everybody.
Yeah, that also plays into the idea, like the fact that like if you're making a setting, you don't even have to particularly, what am I trying to say? You don't have to believe in the things that you're describing. Like you don't have to say, "Oh, I approve of this," or "I believe in this or that." Like if it makes sense in your setting and it makes sense in your story, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, slavery is a prevalent feature of my setting of Enos because a lot of bad
Mm.
guys do the slavery. Turns out it's quite profitable to be that evil. So when you have that as a setting piece, that doesn't mean I agree with it. I know for a fact that slavery is both wrong morally and wrong economically. It's quite simple. If you want to go the pure evil route of why slavery is bad, by the way, this is actually there's a faction in my setting of evil characters who are against slavery for this reason. Because slavery is not economically viable. You can't sell products to slaves. They can produce a little bit, which helps, but you can't do that. So you have a capitalist argument against slavery, which I think is a fun and fascinating thing to explore because you don't get to see that very often. You, and I think
We're
that
we're
more
only
interesting
having
ideas
bold
could be there.
statements on this channel of slavery bad.
I know, right?
What? Yeah,
Plus,
I
the
mean,
undead make way better slaves.
I feel like I
Well,
feel
no, like you
that
joke, but like you could make undead, you can make golems, you can make automatons. Why would you enslave like a dwarf? Who cares? Like,
droid right.
or even worse, a hobbit. Like when I look at D&D, like oh yeah, they raided and they enslaved gnomes. Gnomes? Are you kidding me? Gnomes? Who cares? You can't even eat a gnome and be full.
Prestidigitation farms. Prestidigitation farms, I tell you.
Say they
They
gotta
can
have
freely
something.
cast that spell in older editions. Just, enslave a ton of them, have them make 1 coin a day. If you have 500 of them and you just can generate all the food, eventually it works out for you.
Hmm. And that's why it's important. That's why it's important to give a fair shake to every perspective. I feel like there's too many stories nowadays where it's like there is slavery, but it's like the slaves are, and I'm not pro-slavery myself. I'm not trying to like shit on
Very bold
slaves or
statement
like,
here.
but the idea, I always try to fucking give the clarification, but the idea of like constantly having it be like, oh, well, the slaves are actually these silent heroes or everything about it. It's like, no, just make them be part of the setting. There's no shame in that. You don't have to say that it's wrong or right. The fact that they exist is enough. And if it's part of the world, that's that. And if you don't agree with it, of course you don't. But you don't
They're
have to
modern
let
human beings
that be.
with good morals. But just
Mm,
because you don't agree with it, bad people in your setting might agree with it though. And like Pops was saying, you're depriving yourself of storytelling opportunities by not exploring this thing.
yeah, there's a million and one different ways to explore that. A dynamic. I'm sorry, I can't talk. A dynamic like that is super duper interesting, and I feel like people don't give it enough credence as far as like exploring what it's actually like to be these people. And instead, they're just saying like, "Oh, I'm suffering, and therefore I'm good," which is a weird thing that we go through today.
Another thing that's interesting is, if you're trying to tell a story that's a bit more interesting, taking somebody who is like opposed to something that you believe in is a lot of fun to write. A lot of people will say how much
Oh
fun they have.
yeah,
Like writers will have fun writing villains. I absolutely, as a D&D dungeon master, love writing villain dialogue. I love having characters who just want to ruin my players' days, and it's fun to do that because I get to just partake in something that I don't get to normally engage with. To making my friends cry, which is a lot of
Meh.
fun. And it's one of those things where like you can do that now with your politics. You don't have to actually say, "Oh man, I absolutely think that we should have racial ideologies and stuff like that." But no, you can say, "What if this character believes it? Why does he believe this? What can I do to
yeah,
make it so this character's belief system makes sense?" Because now you give something interesting for the players and the writers and the readers to chew on. What if you actually, and this is I'm trying to like get demonetized. The special Germans. What if you had a character who fully believed in that ideology, but was a good person? I think what it's I know it's not as political, but there's an example of a character who usually in modern writing would be written like a complete piece of crap, but he's written more complex. It's those who've played Witcher 3 know who I'm about to talk about. I think he's the Count. I forget his exact name, but there's a guy in Witcher 3 who is in an abusive relationship with his wife. He mercilessly beats her sometimes, and it's a very violent domestic altercation. Okay. Then the young girl, I think it's Cyril,
Cersei,
yeah, she goes to visit him.
the white
If
haired
this was
one.
written by normal,
You
like
mean the white haired
West,
girl, right?
huh?
You mean the adopted daughter of Geralt,
Yes, your
right?
adopted daughter. She goes to
Yeah,
visit him, like
Cersei.
while you're trying to find him.
No,
And if this was
here.
written by Western people, you would have expected this Count or Baron, I forget who he was, to like try to, do some terrible things to her while she slept, or maybe be
Oh, I know
abusive, or
what you're
maybe
talking about.
smack her
Actually,
around. But
it's a
no,
Baron.
it's a Baron? Okay. But he's a nice guy
It's
to
a
her.
Baron.
He treats her fair and well. It's just he's got his demons, and he takes it out and smacking his wife, which is a wrong thing. And you can point it out when you get there, and you as a player get choices against it, and you help with it. But like, what a more interesting take on it. He's not just a horrible monster who's irredeemable. It's just
Exactly.
one day he snapped and it became normalized. And now that it's normalized, he can't see a way back out of it until you show up and can fix the problem. Wow, what a great exploration and a more interesting take, because all you did was say, what if I took the typical bad guy and made him real? Made him a bit more down to earth. And you can do that with political ideologies. It's so much more interesting. One of my favorite
It's so
animes.
much
Go ahead.
to kind of like, yeah. So again, that plays into the idea that like having evil for evil's sake is just boring. Like, you want to have a character who does the things that he does for reasons that, maybe they're not valid, but they're valid to him or her.
They make sense to the character.
Yes.
Because that's the thing about everything you like, even like, think about yourself. Anything you dislike, anything you absolutely hate that like people have done throughout history, there's a reason they did those things. It doesn't mean you agree with it. It doesn't mean it was a good reason, but they found a reason to justify it.
Yep, and that has value. That has a lot of value as far as like keeping the let's say that you want to keep an audience invested. Yeah.
Mhm.
You get to explore that. Maybe you get to teach your audience something. Maybe you get to show them something, a perspective and empathy that they never thought they'd have. So now, instead of going out and saying, "Oh man, all these people who beat their wives, we should just throw them up and they're all terrible people," no, you come to them and say, "Man, what's wrong with you? Don't you love her? You can have an empathetic talk with her and to him, and pull it out and say, now you can come to a better thing and make them a better person," which is what I think you'd want in all. Black Arena, I kind of don't want to read that comment, but I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna nominate Des.
I got
Pops, go for it.
Hang on. You want me to do a dramatic reading of his most recent comment?
Yes.
So, from Black Aruni, we have, what if it's like the TFS Broly movie and these noseless aliens that love to be enslaved? I'm not reading that. Hang on. He's wrong. He's wrong, because the issue is that we don't explore the reasoning behind that. Like, if he wants to believe that in his own head canon, good for him. Oh my goodness.
I wanted someone else to read it.
Rooney, God damn it.
I don't watch Dragon Ball. I'm not Hispanic enough for that, so I don't know how accurate that is.
It's not in Dragon Ball itself. That's in the Team 4-Star movie, where they.
Okay, well, let me put it this way: I don't know whatever this thing is. I know Broly is from Dragon Ball. I haven't seen it. I'm not Hispanic enough for that.
Correct. So Team 4-Star, they're the guys who make the comedy parodies. So it's a parody of the situation.
Oh,
so that's your answer right there, Rooney. It's a parody that they love being enslaved, because as liberal writers, they have no idea how they can justify writing jokes about slavery. If you look at their behind-the-scenes things, they said that they struggled deeply with writing that episodes, because like, how do we make slavery funny? Which, fair point. It is a little bit tough to make slavery funny. So they just made it like horny sex pests that were into being enslaved.
So let's take a less deranged one. Let's take a less deranged take.
I would love to.
There is an OSR adventure path where there are a bunch of gnomes that love being eaten, right? They like people eating them. And these gnomes aren't like regular gnomes. They're not like D&D type gnomes. They're basically mushroom people. And the reason that they try to get people to eat them is because they are actually a like fungus that infects your insides. Pardon?
I was about to say, yeah, are they infecting them? And you just said.
Yes, they infect them. So what happens is eventually when you die, like gnomes will crawl out of your body, but what happens is you get addicted to eating them, and if you eat too many, you explode into like double the amount of gnomes you ate.
Incredible.
So you can have interesting, messed up, weird stuff like that, but you need to have like a legitimate good reason. An entire species of people that are really, really into being enslaved, kind of weird. An entire species of like parasitic creatures that allow themselves to be like basically like used as like pets, like cats and dogs almost, because they're actually infecting everybody. A little bit more interesting, a little bit more you can play with that.
Well, that's true. Look up toxoplasmosis. But anyway,
I don't know what you're talking about. My cat loves me. He's definitely not a parasite.
yes, no, it's not the cat itself that's a parasite. It's T. gondii that's a parasite within the cat. But go on.
Yeah, I know a
get
little
off.
bit.
I don't want to get off topic, but
Yeah.
We never off topic on this show.
on God. Anyway, yeah, to acknowledge a little bit that Rooney said, I think the idea. Yeah, I mean, the idea of people doing certain things because of, some headcanon reason, I feel like that's probably a detriment to the story because, like, you should kind of understand their motivations. Maybe not, on an in-depth level, but just on some level, you kind of got to know where they're coming from.
It makes sense otherwise.
Yeah.
Now it's different if you're writing like a comedy thing, but even a comedy thing, you need something to like ground the audience. And that's a big thing with like very surreal media, which I absolutely love. But you still need some like anchor points to like hold down people's perception to reality, because otherwise, if you get like way too weird and way too out there, people just have nothing to compare it to. Anything you do, it's like, well, I don't understand what's going on anymore anyway, so sure, fuck it, why not?
Yeah, again, I feel like maybe it's a little bit of a reach, but I feel like that also speaks to the idea of like people trying too hard to espouse their own ideology to the point where like they write these things where it's like explicitly exactly what they believe in is right, or this other thing is wrong or whatever, and you fall into this trap where like the audience is like, what the hell are you talking about? Like it's hard to follow.
I feel like you get a lot more leeway with some surrealist comedies because I think to like, what's that director? He did Blazing Saddles and a couple other ones, but like with Mel Brooks, yeah. Because like with Mel Brooks, like there's like a very thin veneer of like anything making sense with a lot of those, or even going to something completely different. Monty Python, like, or Chowder. Like a lot of these, like there's a very thin line between what you're watching and like any logic, but they're still hilarious. But but it is important, of course, to do that. Have that to have that grounding. Whereas with with what you're saying, I do think it takes a lot more skillfulness to ground everything in ways that which I mean, if your main point is about grounding, then yeah, like of course it needs grounding, but I would say that like there needs to be a lot more grounding than say like surrealist
some level. It depends.
but
It
yeah, of
depends.
course grounding is important.
It depends on the scale of like the consequences of the actions within the story. But yeah.
Fun, everybody. And we're moving towards the end now of this today's episode. So I promised you all that we'd come up with some wacky ideologies because I think this is a very helpful exercise that will allow you as a writer to kind of flesh out just some ideas in your own head. What are some things that you could explore that are new and unique? Because everybody always wants new and unique ideas in the world. And I think from here, we're going to move on to that for the last half hour. Stick around after we're done here, though, because I'm going to be streaming with Nebula tonight. And that's why he's hanging out here in chat. Say hello, Nebula.
Hello,
Nebula,
hello.
you're the man.
Yep.
Indeed, I was able to set up my second monitor all on my own.
Excellent.
Nice.
Look at this guy.
Yeah, so I will be able to actually read chat this time.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
boys. So swing by tonight on his Twitch, which should be linked in the comments below still, in the description below. But yes, so
Yep.
Yeah.
on to weird political ideologies. This is something that I want to split this into fantasy and sci-fi roughly. So like you don't have to like do one and one, but like you say, hey, this should work in a fantasy setting, or this should work in a sci-fi setting, because you kind of need magic or science for some of these things to work. We already mentioned a couple, like I mentioned the religious communists, and I mentioned the cult of the undead that help as advisors. And I think I'm going to go with another one, unless somebody else has something they want to do first. No, okay,
Go for
Uh,
it.
Nah, you go right ahead.
okay. So another fun and wacky, I guess, exploratory ideology that I've got cooking in the back of my mind is a hyper true democracy, but like it's for bug people, so they all psychically know what's going on. So think about like ants and all those bugs that like communicate through pheromones. So there's no they don't
Uh-huh.
have the ability to lie. So they just have a democracy. But if you don't vote in the democracy, they just kill you. So if you vote wrong, you
Hmm.
get killed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hang on. How does that even work? Because I feel like that would trickle down from whoever's the quote unquote queen or monarch or whatever. Like
Exactly.
everyone would just. Yeah.
But here's the thing.
All right. All right.
And the reason it
Explain.
works is this has got to be like a sci-fi setting, because they try to appeal to and espouse that they have like a high democracy, which appeals to other races that want to join their system, because the non-bugs are allowed to join as like secondary class citizens. So that's how they get
Okay. I
around
was
it.
gonna
They're allowed
They're
to
allowed to
talk.
Interesting.
go ahead.
because I was gonna say like if it was like one species that everyone is connected psychologically and can read each other's minds and everything, that's just a hive mind. Like that's not a democracy. Like democracy kind of implies the idea that like individuals can have an opinion, but then you said there's what other species or other people that are disconnected.
Yep, they basically think about the current modern, like again, I'm not trying to take sides with the liberal ideal, where you have spread democracy globally and you have other people who are democratic joining, our democratic bloc. They recognize that. That's how a lot of the more mammalian races think, and those who are not part of the hive mind. So they pretend to have all this democratic stuff when they're really a hive mind, but they still do actually hold the election process. It's just they secretly are this hive mind, which does mean though you have a weird quirk that people who are not of this race, if enough of them get into a little like
Mm.
a block, they can actually vote for things, because the voting and all that does work. So they're stuck between
Wow.
pretending that you can't actually vote, that you can vote for change, while also stopping all dissension because they're a hive mind.
Yeah, and what are the consequences? Does that lead to like some sort of civil war or something like that? Like I feel like people would eventually be like, "Hey, hang on, you're not believing in the thing that I am, and therefore you're wrong." Because there's so many people that are already established there before, let's say, the quote unquote immigrants move in, that it would cause problems.
Possibly. Again. This is an idea that I had, floating around my head. I haven't fleshed it out.
Oh,
I'm working on a
I got-
fantasy setting. Well, I'm working on a fantasy setting, not a science fiction one. And I wanted to save this specific story for a sci-fi, because I feel like fantasy races and fantasy culture wouldn't care as much what their neighbors thought about them, because like the
right.
distance to communication is so much smaller. Especially because like in my setting, I have actual
Yeah.
people who worship Satan around. So it's like those guys are just clearly evil. So who cares if you have a society of people who are a little bit more like, I don't know, less egalitarian, I suppose.
No one's
Okay.
going to be like the Satanists are actually the good guys. Look, they have democracy. While in like a sci-fi setting with enough like space, they might do that.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But they're not explicitly Satanists, right? Like,
Oh, in my setting, they
Does
actually
he
are.
know? Does he know?
He does not.
oh,
Yeah. So in my setting, and this is why I always. This goes back to politics, and I hate how there's so many evil cults, and they just like, oh yeah, we worship Satan. Why? Because it's like, what the fuck? No,
because
it's
he
not a fun
opposed
villain to
God.
fight. So I said I need to make sure that when I'm making my setting, it makes sense as to why you would worship the devil. What do you get out of it? And obviously it's still got to be a bad thing, or else everybody would do it. So the idea is that, to keep a long story short, in the ancient past, when the devil tried to kill God with the first weapon ever forged, a sword called mortality, and during the fight, the sword mortality was shattered, and all the shards of mortality fell onto Earth, so all the people now could die. That's how we used to be ageless, and we're not anymore. So because everybody, has this shard of mortality inside of them, then Tazan, who's my Satan guy, Tazan says, all right, well, once I get all those shards back, I'll be able to reforge my sword, and I'll just start killing the gods again. But all the shards are stuck in humans, and he can't get to humans because he was locked in hell. So now when a human dies, he can re-grab the shards. So now you have cultists like, but if I can speed up getting Tazan these shards, he won't need to take my shard, so I won't die, A. Or B, he could take my shard out of me without me dying. Therefore, working for him is a good thing because I'll have everlasting life, and because I helped him win, he's going to obviously let us, run Earth again. So now it makes sense. Yeah. Where Satan is, in reality, it's like, if you worship Satan, he says he's destroying the world when he comes back. That's not really a good idea.
You get some people who are like into that really extreme thing, but they're not big enough. There's never been like a Satanist government. You know what I mean? There's never been a great Satanist empire.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I want this to be a massive empire because I really like the Crusades. The imagery and the iconography is really neat, but I understand that having some vaguely brown people be the ones that all the other groups are fighting is not what I want in my setting at all. So instead, I made these evil Satanists. They have a whole kingdom that they run. And now, when they want to go on crusade, you just go kill the Satanists over there. And they're not like an actual like an actual real life group anymore. Instead of being like, this is vaguely racist. No, it's just they're evil Satanists. They just worship Satan. There's no moral compunction about let's go fight them. They're the bad guys, but they don't think they're the bad guys. And I think it's a much more interesting and fun setting because of that.
So when do the Satanists do their Satan crusade?
They've done it multiple times, and they've won a lot of them. That's kind of the. If you remember, me specifically, there was.
Have you heard about Saladin?
Yes.
That. Now stop it. Stop. Hang on, before we jump on his ass, because I got beef with that. No, hang on, real quick. So you said he forged the sword. No, does he not have access to the materials with which he forged the sword originally?
He made it while he was in heaven, and now he was shunned.
There you go.
Into hell.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, that was my one question. Was like, if it wasn't for that, I would be almost like, why doesn't he just make a new one?
Yeah, he wants to, but he can't. He took his stuff away.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, and I think that it's just a nice way because I like reading a lot of the old Conan stories where like there's just some random evil monster dude who's like just objectively a piece of shit, and Conan gets to kick his ass, and we're like, hell yeah, kick his, break his teeth. And it's like, well, I wanted to have that, and it's like, well, I kind of want to have more fun though. So, but yeah,
it's hard having like we don't feel bad about beating these guys up, but also it makes sense for them to exist.
Exactly,
it takes a bit of work.
And I think that the setting is better for it because the players have had a lot of fun. In fact, I've had several players say, hey, maybe these guys aren't wrong after all in this setting. And, well, if they want to believe that, they're more than welcome to. That just shows that they have fully engaged with the world building and realize, it's got to make just enough sense that somebody could theoretically believe in it. And I'm not saying if they're right or wrong because, they used to own more of the world and they used to be a huge globe-spanning empire. So maybe there's something to all their crazy, quirky ideas.
Oh my goodness!
All right, so now let's kill Dez.
All right,
Dez.
All right,
it's over. Lay your head on the guillotine real quick.
Yeah, explain to us
why
you're talking smack about
Solomon. Because despite him being good enough for Dante to put him in like one of the upper levels of hell, he was still in hell. So checkmate.
Yeah, that's the thing. Would you? I don't know what you would diagnose that as. Is like whether it's political or moral or what. But the
Autism.
fact
I
that
would
like
diagnose it with autism.
I'm sorry. There's different levels of what would you say, like morally wrong or what?
So, this is gonna go back to an earlier topic that the chat was talking about. Is yeah, I like the lithocracy, by the way, not affairs. Don't worry. Um,
Okay.
I morality should play a role in how ideologies get developed, and like what is
Of course.
considered moral and immoral by a society will naturally come out in their ideologies. You got to remember that as you're working on them. But I disagree that every ideology needs to be strictly moral. I understand that everybody who believes in their ideology thinks they're correct, but that's not the same as necessarily being moral. Sometimes they can appeal to a higher idea than their own. Sometimes, like I said earlier, with the Christian libertarians, you can believe something that on the surface is contradictory as long as you could find a way to justify it. I'm not a believer in the idea that all humans are completely logical beings and act in only logical ways. I understand that there's
No,
some illogic in there, especially when you start talking politics with people. They get illogical very, very quickly. That's not just me saying that my politics are correct. It's just when you ask them to explain their beliefs, a lot of people cannot do that very well. I'm
I feel
sorry,
like it's
batteries
all
went today. Yeah, have a good one, Nefarious.
Switch over.
that's my guy. I feel like it's all based on perspective though, because when you get into like extremism, it's almost like morals are just dropped based on when you're very, let's say you're on one end of the spectrum. And by the way, in my opinion, I feel like two political extremes are just two horns on the same devil, no matter what god you're worshiping or whatever you believe in.
You
But
get
I
that
feel like
extreme, it's real bad.
I feel
It's
like
horseshit theory
morals.
because you get so extreme that you're basically like, okay, like my thing is so right that anyone who's like different than me, like they're so wrong that like, does it
Yeah, it's
really
almost
matter if I
you.
unalive them? Like, is
Yeah,
it that bad? Like, come on.
you almost you lose the idea of morals on like a smaller scale of like, well, killing someone is good, and it's like, no, it isn't. Like, of course not. It's like, stop.
Yeah.
Or they acknowledge, yes, killing is bad, but it's more important that the ideology is pushed. It's more important that
Yeah,
the beliefs are more important than any amount of individual life.
that's what I mean. Like, it's less about morals and it's more about supporting whatever it is that you believe in. It's, I don't know. It's messed up.
Very messed up. Or you can be the abject monster that is someone like Vosh, where they completely will throw away all their morals and compunctions just because they want to win.
Would you call that like a pursuit of what kind of goal is that? Like financial, personal, or
Um,
what?
so him specifically, it's I don't want to get again super political here yet. Well,
Okay.
you know what? Fuck it. Today's a political show. We're gonna get political. I think Vosh is pursuing power because he's powerless in his own life, and he wants to have some sort of control over people, and therefore he's willing to do everything. Look at the way he treats his chat. Is a great example. Whenever he's on chat,
Mm.
if people start disagreeing with him, he starts belittling them and bullying them and just being in charge of things is what he wants to do. He wants to be the guy at the top no matter what ends up happening. He's very much a political maneuver. Whereas someone like
Okay.
Destiny, I think, Destiny is much more of a like a how do I put it?
A cuck.
Yes, he's very much a cock, but he's also a people pleaser where he wants to have the most amount of people enjoying themselves the most, even if it means that there's technically worse off as a society. Because again, his belief is pleasure above all. That's why that's why he's a cuck. That's why he believes in free sex and all that stuff because he believes in hedonistic ideas is more important than anything.
Yeah. Yes.
You can really boil a lot of people down to a few tenets that they end up believing in, and why they would sacrifice what should be basic moral ideals or things that they would normally agree with for the situation. And I know we're all railing on Destiny lately for it, and rightfully so, but you cannot be against political violence except when it comes to the president elect or the future president elect. He's gonna be the damn president. You know, You can't be that. That doesn't make sense.
You hear, chat. Okay, you can make fun of him if he's wrong, or say, "Wow, kid, that was such a great prediction" when he's
Yeah.
right.
Come back and make fun of me. Yeah, send me super chats how stupid I am. Let's do it. Yeah, that's the yeah. I only respond to super chats saying how stupid I am. Otherwise, if you say stupid in chat, I ignore it. So remember that. Start getting those pesos together, boys.
You better. If you want to send him money to tell me that I'm stupid, like I got you. Go ahead.
Unironically, if you want to send any of these guys money, you send it to me, and I will, find a way to give it to them. I'll either buy them a book or maybe a beer or something. But I'll make sure that if you love one of these hosts, I'll give them something. Except for Peg, he owes me money for the last book.
Peg, rest in. I hope he's doing well. I fucking message.
I like how you're acting as if like we don't know where he is. Like he's taking care of his kid. Like let's not act like he's missing in action, missing for 5 days.
I'll bust his door down, that fucking baby to bed right now.
He's got a child. He's basically dead.
Yes, CQ, you'll have to ping me here all you want, buddy. You get executive privileges. All right. With that, I think we're going to call a little early today, unless you guys have some more funky political ideals you want to bring up.
Basically, I would wrap it up by saying, like, it doesn't matter really what your political ideology is. If you want to write a good story, you have to pay attention to every different little political perspective and the character's perspective. Pay attention to that. And you don't need to be condescending. You don't need to be preachy, because you're going to mess up your story. You should do better. You should do better to kind of establish why someone is right or why someone is wrong.
Someone believes they're right and wrong if you disagree with it.
There you go.
Nothing is, in my opinion, one of the greatest tragedies whenever I look at modern political people, the way they write stuff, is they're so concerned about not being accidentally wrong that they end up not allowing you the ability to prove your idea is correct. One of the and I don't want to give you advice on how to be more of a propaganda minister, but if you're going to propagandize me, make it enjoyable. If I like watching your crappy propaganda, guess what? I'm going to probably end up sticking around for it. And if I stick around for enough of it, I'm going to maybe end up agreeing with you because I can start to see your points of view. If you make characters who are agreeable and enjoyable, I can see why you would think these things. I could, come around to your perspectives.
Of course. And like even in the process of establishing, let's say, why does this character believe in what they believe in? You're probably going to learn something yourself. So put some work in, and like you'll probably learn something about it, and maybe it'll change your perspective. Maybe it'll prove that your perspective is even more right than it was before.
And here's something tell a story instead of a message. I agree completely. And here's a real pro tip from just one human who's lived a long life here to another human who's probably figured their life out. If your ideas and beliefs can be so easily shattered that by listening to the other side so you can try to debunk them converts you, you either didn't fully believe those things or didn't actually understand those things you claim to believe in. That's okay if you need to get more exploration and get more answers. Asking questions is completely fine. But to shut out all discussion and ideology really tells me that you don't actually understand or even believe in what you're espousing. So have a little more faith in yourself and your beliefs if you're going to, try to propagandize me with them. And chat, I want to let you all know, I really want to cover the Acolyte. It looks fucking awful. Please come let me know in the server if you want us to do that. I might host a weekly movie night or to catch up with it. I know it just ended and it looks so bad. It's just look at the message, my boy. Look at the message.
Are you gonna make me do this? Are you gonna make me do this, kid?
I'm gonna make you do this, big boy.
If I have to do it, you're.
Yeah, I've been tricked. You got me on this to talk. I was able to passionately talk about history and Star Wars, and then you're like, You won't watch the worst thing to happen to Star Wars, maybe ever, which is saying something given the sequel trilogy.
Hey man.
Maybe. It's still all in the
What-
air.
what-
for that.
And you're like,
Check.
solid maybe. It's like, let's see how much money we can rake in with this.
Yeah, yeah. If I get a $50 super chat right now, I will go to Dez's house and I will videotape him crying as I show him the show. Otherwise, I think this is a good spot to end it. Thank you all for showing up with us tonight and hanging out. For those of you who
That's
still
right.
have time to hang out with us, don't go anywhere. Nebula is going to
Yep.
be going live soon. He's going to be grabbing a link, and I'll be posting it here. And if you come back here after we are no longer live, come to my server, and you can find links to him there. We usually post it in the Video Creators Guild when he's also live without me. And I believe he
Let
just got
me-
officially monetized. So now you can throw
Yes,
bits
I
at
did.
us and insult us over there.
There, I posted
Right.
it in the
Everybody-
fucking,
Didn't you
thing.
mention you were doing a channel with Shadow?
Up. I
What?
got another
Shadow
$1
rules.
super chat from Mr. Rooney.
Oh
Thank you very
my
much,
goodness,
sir.
Rooney.
Let me
Rooney,
see.
I'm
Let me
pretty
see.
sure that's all you get paid in a month. Are you sure it's okay to spend it all in one place?
Rune.
I appreciate you, man. You don't got to give it all to us. You've
You
been a
didn't even
scholar
say
and legend.
racial slurs at us this time. What the hell?
You're the
A
best.
Why
dollar out of
just-
spite. There you go.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Don't worry,
Everybody's,
Rooney. I promise that I will torture Dez with a cattle prod for you.
All right, fellas. Everybody's plugs are down below. If there's anything else, you go ahead and talk. But God bless you, chat. I love you. Shout out to you.
And keep your eye on the server, by the way. There might be a special Seth Skorkowski, not Seth Skorkowski, Seth Zenteach type video coming out from